What is up, my YouTube family? It's boy Arrahaffv, the only, the W, whatever you want to call me. And today, you're back here on the Arrahaffv channel for something a little different than we usually do here on the channel. We are going to do a discussion video on my personal favorite top 5 fights in the Bleach 1000-Year Blood War arc. Now, if you don't know, if you're new to the channel, then you don't know that my favorite anime in the entire world is Bleach. I absolutely love the anime since the very first time I watched it. I fell in love with it, and immediately after I finished, I wasn't satisfied. So I went and read the manga as well. And I mean, at this point, I've read the manga like 18 times over. But with it now having an anime adaptation, I feel like it would be the perfect time to give my personal favorites of my top 5 fights in all of the 1000-Year Blood War arc. Now, this is just personal. This is just me, my personal top 5 in the 1000-Year Blood War arc. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, as always, feel free to hit that thumbs up button. And without further ado, let's get into the video with number 5 on the list. Now, this list was pretty difficult to make. I was wondering if I even wanted to rank them at all, because it is kind of hard to rank them. I just kind of like them all for different reasons. But I'm fairly sure that I'm okay with putting this one at number 5, and that is, of course, Kenpachi versus Gremmy. Like I said, I absolutely love this fight. Gremmy was a very interesting character. I know that he's very interestingly received within the Bleach fan base, because he does kind of exist in this bubble of where you didn't really hear anything about Gremmy's existence until he fought and died to Kenpachi. So literally the only time Gremmy ever exists or is even mentioned within the series is through the fight with Kenpachi. So at times it does kind of feel like he was made specifically for the purpose of showing Kenpachi's Chikai. But even with that being the case, I'm okay with it. I love V the Visionary. Gremmy was a great character. They really put a lot of thought into his power being basically anything he imagines he can make into reality, which in turn is a very powerful ability. But they really they did a good job at power scaling what it was. Sorry, that's my cat. I don't know why he's tripping right now. But they did a really good job at scaling to not make it too strong for the Bleach universe to handle. Now the fight starts very interestingly with Gremmy just basically telling Kenpachi that Kenpachi can't beat him no matter what, because I mean, obviously his power is so overpowered that in Gremmy's mind he can't be defeated. And Kenpachi goes to cut Gremmy and he can't. And Gremmy simply explains to Kenpachi that he imagined that his body was made out of steel, in which Kenpachi would then retaliate by saying, you should have started with that, and I would have applied more pressure to cut steel, because in Kenpachi's mind, he can cut anything. And then after he cuts Gremmy, after he's imagined his body being steel, he reveals to Gremmy that there's nothing that Gremmy could imagine that Kenpachi couldn't cut through. And I really liked that panel, because it shows a lot of ignorance between the two characters, but ignorance in a different way. You know, each character is ignorant differently. You know, Kenpachi obviously thinking that there's nothing in the world that he can't cut, and there's nothing in the world that Gremmy could imagine that Kenpachi couldn't cut through. And Gremmy obviously thinking, well, Kenpachi is just a guy with a sword, he couldn't possibly beat me. Which is why this fight pans out so well, because the way the characters mesh together, and they're so different and alike at the same time, which I think was a very good decision for them to go with for a fight like this. The fight then continues with Gremmy essentially shooting lava at Kenpachi, in which Kenpachi would block, almost hitting Yachiru, who is sitting on the sidelines, in which Kenpachi says, Yachiru, why are you sitting there? You should probably move. We're about to have an intense battle. In which Kenpachi would learn that Gremmy has turned Yachiru's bones into cookies, essentially. So essentially it's impossible for Yachiru to move because her bones are cookies. And this really like gives you a really good understanding of just how good Gremmy's powers really are, because I mean, he simply just has to imagine it. He imagined Yachiru's bones were cookies, and that's what happened. And now Yachiru is immobilized essentially. And with this being the case, it puts into perspective just how powerful Gremmy really is. So he then Kenpachi goes to attack Gremmy, in which Gremmy imagines that the space around Kenpachi is water, a big square, a cube of water, in which he traps Kenpachi in, and then he uses his imagination to kind of open the cube he made, the little stadium he made for them to fight on, and let the water fall into the crack and then close it, right? And I think that's a very it's a very interesting way to show just how powerful Grimmy really is, you know. But it also puts into perspective what his imagination is like, because somebody with a power like that, the only real thing they have to stop them is their own imagination, right? So it really puts into perspective Grimmy's imagination as a whole, which later on in this fight would come back to bite him. And so obviously Kenpachi breaks through this, and he also saves Yachiru in the process, but he also realizes that once he saves Yachiru, that her bones are turned back to normal, insinuating that Grimmy essentially has to focus on the thing he's imagining for it to stay the way it is. So at the time, he was imagining Yachiru's bones being cookies, but once he stopped focusing on Yachiru and started focusing on killing Kenpachi, he forgot about Yachiru, which inadvertently turned her bones back to the way they were, which would basically say that Grimmy would have to stay focused on what he's imagining for it to obviously stay present, which again is a very good way to make him very powerful, but also keep his power in scale enough for Bleach, right? And then we have this amazing like altercation between the two, where Kenpachi just starts laying it on Grimmy slash after slash after slash, and Grimmy's obviously imagining that these slashes are healing, but as he's imagining them healing, Kenpachi keeps laying them on him. So as he heals, one another appears, and in this moment, Grimmy's losing a lot of blood, and honestly, the scene is kind of brutal, honestly, and Grimmy's in his head, he's like, wow, I'm gonna lose here because I can't essentially regenerate fast enough to stop his slashes. So in Grimmy's mind, he's thinking he's gonna lose this battle, and that's when Kenpachi stops slicing Grimmy and tells him, "You're imagining that you're losing to me, which is why I'm beating you." And in that moment, Grimmy kind of has an epiphany of, wow, I was imagining that Kenpachi was beating me, that I couldn't heal faster than he could slice me, that he was going to defeat me right here, and therefore I was losing. And then Grimmy retaliates to say, "You'll regret telling me that," because it essentially puts Grimmy's mindset into a completely different place, right? He in his mind, he was thinking he was going to lose, and so he started losing. And now that that has been cleansed from his brain, he is he's open to fight a lot harder, essentially. And then this would eventually lead to Grimmy duplicating himself and basically saying that his power, his imagination duplicates as he duplicates his body, which I mean is an interesting concept in itself, but I don't have a problem with it. It for the most part makes enough sense, and he uses this duplication of imagination to summon a meteor down on the Soul Society to just destroy the entire Soul Society as a whole. And I think this is it's a very good scene of like Grimmy in his life has never really had the want to prove that he's the strongest, because everybody around him has known that he was the strongest, whereas Kenpachi has had to fight and fight and fight to prove that he was the strongest within his own world, which puts a very good parallel between the two characters. One's the strongest because he knows he's the strongest and he doesn't feel the need to prove it, while the other wants to be the strongest by beating other strong people, right? And so their philosophies kind of clash, but throughout the battle you can see Grimmy kind of adapting Kenpachi's philosophy for fighting, in which he would just at the end of the battle just wants to kill Kenpachi completely, which is why he summons this giant meteor to destroy essentially the entire Soul Society, which I think is absolutely insane. And this is where we see something absolutely crazy. And when he says the crazy line, he says, "Drink Nozarashi," and we finally see Kenpachi's Bankai as he slices clean through the meteor with ease, and we get to see this big kind of butcher blade or cleaver. It's absolutely cartoonishly huge that he's holding over his shoulder, and he reveals that that's the form of his Shikai, his released blade, Nozarashi. And it's a very cool scene where because it's one of those things we've been waiting for kenpachi to get for such a long time, and we're finally getting to see it here. And so I'm just gonna kind of skim through this as fast as I can because I don't want this video to be too long. We then see Gremmy kind of just get tired of kenpachi as a whole and just want to kill him, just want to get rid of him forever, and so he starts duplicating himself more and essentially just starts jumping onto kenpachi over and over and over again with all his different versions. And then he uses these versions to imagine kenpachi in the vacuum of space, in which you get this very nice panel where you can see kind of kenpachi's his eyes kind of defiguring, and you can see like the vacuum of space really affecting his body and in his eyes and whatnot, which I think was a very well done panel. And it shows kind of his face bubbling up and whatnot, which is very good attention to detail on their part. In which kenpachi just sticks his giant cleaver blade through the opening that Gremmy left from the space time, and essentially cuts Gremmy in half with the shikai from essentially the vacuum of space, which was absolutely insane. And which even when he came out of the vacuum of space, you can still kind of see the effects on his face and in his eyes and whatnot, which again I think is very good attention to detail. And then Gremmy imagines these bombs into himself and essentially tries to suicide himself and all of his clones onto kenpachi, which does do some damage to him, but obviously doesn't kill our boy. And we get this really cool shot of kenpachi just kind of standing in the rubble, still standing on his 2 feet, which I think is very kenpachi. It's a very kenpachi way to shoot that scene, in which we get Gremmy just absolutely going insane. He's like, why can't I kill this guy? He's a monster. I just want to kill him. I want to kill him. I want to kill him. And he says, well, if I'm not as strong as you now, I'll just imagine that I'm stronger than you. I'll just imagine that I'm you, and that's when we get kind of a controversial-ish ending, where we get Gremmy, essentially his body explodes because in his head he's imagining that kenpachi is a monster, a beast. And so when he tries to become kenpachi, his body can't handle what he imagines kenpachi to be, if that makes sense. It's a very crazy psychology, but when you really think about it, it makes a lot of sense. And this ends up imploding his body, and that's kind of the end of what we see from V the Visionary. I really did enjoy this fight. I think they could have prolonged it a little longer, but there were other fights on this list that you can tell they wanted to be a little longer, so they shortened other ones, which I'm 100% okay with. I mean, could we have potentially seen kenpachi's Bankai in this fight versus Gremmy to attempt to defeat him? For sure we could, but I'm kind of fine with how this fight kind of ended off. It was a very good showcase for kenpachi. It was a very good showcase for Gremmy. Like I said, Gremmy exists in this very weird vacuum of just kenpachi. But even so, the fight was amazing. I loved it. That's my number 5. Moving on to number 4. I think my number 4 will be the final battle, the very final battle in all of Bleach, which would be Ichigo and Aizen versus Yhwach. I mean, if I were to sit here and analyze this fight all the way through, this video would be 2 hours long. Essentially, this fight was a great showcase for both characters. It had, again, a controversial endings, which you'll start to see. You'll start to see a lot throughout the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. But I absolutely loved the fight. Getting to see Aizen back in action against Yhwach, getting to see Ichigo use his Bankai once more against Yhwach, and kind of have this interesting evolution, but also degrading of his Bankai that he would essentially use to kill Yhwach in the end. But yeah, everybody's like show of power and just getting to see them all fight together. Great fight. I think that'll be my number 4. As for number 3, we will go with none other than Yamamoto versus Yhwach, or the fake Yhwach, the fake Stern Ritter Yhwach. I absolutely love this fight just because it is such a good showcase of how incredibly powerful Yamamoto is, having the strongest Bankai in all of Bleach, essentially. I mean, what more needs to be said? And now that the fight's been animated, I've grown to love it even more than I did before, essentially, just because first of all, the animators went crazy with that fight. They did not have to do what they did, but they did it anyway. um, but it put a lot more detail into what the fight was instead of just looking at it from a manga panel perspective. Um, I love how Yamamoto's Bankai works. I think it's a very smart idea for a Bankai, having the north, east, south, west. Um, Perfect. Like I said, everything about this fight was perfect for me. It really got to show off like why Yamamoto was so incredibly dangerous. And they even had that shot, that manga panel where Yachiru's like, "Hurry up and finish this fight, Yamamoto, because if you don't, your Bankai will essentially destroy the entire Soul Society." Just because I mean it's so incredibly powerful. You know what I mean? Like all that heat would essentially dry up and implode the entire Soul Society, which really puts Yamamoto's power into a good perspective. So I really enjoyed that fight a lot for yeah, that reason. I mean, it was a very good showcase of what Yamamoto could do, and obviously it was animated beautifully in the anime. So kudos to them for that. All right, moving on into number 2. This was a little bit difficult. My number 1 and number 2 honestly could be interchangeable on any day, but on this day specifically, because I might wake up tomorrow and think differently, but on this day specifically, I think my number 2 out of the number 2 and number 1 will be Ichibei versus Yuhaba, the Clash of Titans, one of the most legendary fights in all of Bleach period. I mean, it was just what can I say about this fight that hasn't already been said? It was essentially perfect. Everything about it was perfect. We got to see this absolute beast of a character, Ichibei, finally showcase why he's so powerful and why he is the captain of Squad Zero. And we finally really get to see Yuhaba kind of actually put effort into a battle for the first time, which I don't feel like we've seen much before that fight. At least not to the extent of how it was in that fight. I just love Ichibei's Zanpakuto. I love his Bankai. The choreographing in this fight was just simply amazing, and what they were able to do with the sketches for the manga panels with Ichibei's power obviously just essentially being a sort of ink, how they were able to kind of draw that out. It was just the panels were perfect, the moments were perfect. Like I said, the true clash of titans within this arc. It really showcased, as I said, Ichibei's Zanpakuto, which essential power is Ichibei gives names to everything within the Soul Society, and obviously names is one of the most important things in Bleach because that name is what gives you power. And so essentially he would have the power to take and give names to other things, hence his Bankai, which essentially allows him to take the name of somebody like Yuhaba, which he did. He took Yuhaba's name, essentially taking all his power away, and give him a new name, in which he gave him the name of Black Ant, which gave Yuhaba essentially the powers of a black ant, which I think is such a crazy power. He could just take the power away from anything and just give it a new random power. All he has to say is fish, and now that person just has the power and durability of a fish. You know what I mean? Which I think is an incredibly crazy power. Now obviously Yuhaba being a walking hack himself, it didn't really it affected him, but obviously he was able just to get his powers back throughout the Almighty and whatnot, just because how incredibly overpowered Yuhaba is. But it in no way downgraded Ichibei's power. Like I said, just a true clash of titans. I loved this fight. I loved everything about it. I think it was perfectly done, and that is my number 2 for now. For now. And we are finally here to the number 1. Like I said, I've went back and forth with number 2 and number 1 a lot, because number 1 is one fight that I never ever in a million years would have expected for me to enjoy so much. And luckily we should be getting it very, very soon in the anime as well. But that fight is, of course, none other than, oh man, I can't believe I'm saying this, but Mayuri and Nimue versus Permita, the left hand of the Soul King. I don't know what it was about this fight, man. Like, it's like they put so much effort into this battle, into the story of Mayuri and his powers, and into the relationship between Mayuri and Nimbu. You know what I mean? You could tell the writers of this fight really had high expectations and really loved and wanted to go deeper into the character of Mayuri and even Nimbu, you know, which I thought was it was very interesting and unexpected. And compared to all like a lot of the other fights within the Thousand Year Blood War arc, it's significantly long. I'm pretty sure Grace is like 9 chapters if I'm not mistaken, something around there, which compared to a Bleach fight is incredibly long. You know what I mean? And this is what I meant back in the Kenpachi versus Gremmy fight when I said you can tell they just wanted some fights to be longer, so they kind of took away some of the time from other fights. And this was one of those fights that you could tell they just wanted to be longer. I can honestly make an entire video on its own about this fight, which I probably will in the future, so I'm probably not going to dive really deep into it right now, because I'm probably just going to make a video on this fight on its own. But like I said, I've always liked Mayuri from his fight with Uryu in the first arc. I mean, not in the first arc, in the Soul Society arc, sorry. But I never really had a stern love for the character. I thought he was pretty cool. I thought he was a nice addition to the cast, but I never really, loved the character. It never really stuck to me very much. But this fight, it, like I said, the detail that they put into Mayuri, they kind of forced you to kind of build this relationship and love for Mayuri as a character, and how kind of interesting he was in his own way. Excuse me. Like I said, it was a perfect combination, because there's Mayuri, this character, this scientist that's obsessed with learning new things and wanting to know everything that science has to offer and finding out new things and experimenting on new things every day. And then you have this thing that he's never seen or experimented or seen anything on before, the left hand of the Soul King, the one thing in all of Bleach that Mayuri probably hasn't prepared for before or seen before or worked on before or experimented on before, which being the Soul King. And so having the left hand of the Soul King be his opponent in Pernida, I think was perfect, because I mean, one of the biggest debates within the Bleach universe is that Mayuri essentially just has a situation for every fight, right? He's kind of just Batman, right? And where no matter who he fights, he kind of has experiments or projects that give him an edge in certain battles. But this is one battle he couldn't possibly have an edge in, because it's one foe he had never experienced or come into contact with before, which I think is a very good place to start for a fight. It's a very good pairing of the two. Now, this fight also showcased Mayuri's Bankai, which again, I did not expect to like as much as I did, but my goodness, did they put effort into it and make me like it anyway. Which would essentially end up being, I can't remember the name off the top of my head. I would have to get the name. So yeah, it would showcase, Mayuri's Bankai, which, I mean, it's very interesting Bankai to start off with. It's very interesting, but it's also very cool in its own kind of weird, sadistic, twisted way, if that makes sense. Which is Mayuri in a nutshell, you know what I mean? So it makes sense. But basically, his Bankai, once he activates it, it ends up showing this weird, almost Buddha-ish, purple figure. And the figure just sits there, and essentially the figure itself births Yellow Baby, which is, as we know, Mayuri's first Bankai. It births one of these babies, but the difference is, within this Bankai, he can choose what type of power the baby is birthed with, which essentially makes him kind of like Yuhaba in that sense, where he can just give it any power, which basically makes it the ultimate attack and defense, right? Because he could just fight his opponent for an extended amount of time, find out all their abilities, activate a Bankai, and then make his Bankai perfectly equipped to counter his opponent's abilities, which is exactly what he did with Pernida, having the baby being born with no teeth. So the baby didn't eat Pernida, but it would eat it whole by just swallowing it. Because if the baby would have used teeth to dissect Pernida, Pernida would then just grow from the parts that the baby bit off, essentially just making more Pernidas and Pernidas grow. But in this situation, he made the baby born without teeth to swallow Pernida whole. in which we would obviously just see Pernita just kind of blast through the baby, because at the end of the day, Pernita is a Quincy, so he just kind of shoots one of his, I assume to be Quincy arrows or Quincy abilities, through the baby, getting out. But again, I think this is a very good showcase in like how powerful Mayuri is, and it's a very good showcase of his character. Really, like his Bankai matches his character so incredibly well. You know what I mean? Just being able to do his research on a certain opponent and put that research into his Bankai to essentially overcome that opponent, which is what he attempted to do against Pernita, obviously. In which later on in the fight, Pernita would gain the upper hand. Excuse me, and then obviously Nimue would have to step in to save Mayuri, and this is where we learned a lot more about Mayuri's weird, twisted, but also very Mayuri love for Nimue, as Nimue is his very own creation, and he sees Nimue as the perfect creation. So although it's a very twisted love, at the end of the day, it is a love that he has for Nimue, as Nimue goes and tries to sacrifice herself to save Mayuri, in which Mayuri essentially just doesn't want her to do that, because she is Mayuri's perfect creation, and her job is to grow. Like, that was the entire purpose of her being created. Her job is to evolve and evolve and evolve, not to save Mayuri, right? So as she was saving Mayuri, he's essentially being like, this is not what you're supposed to do. This is not what you were created to do. Don't risk your life to save me, because your purpose is to evolve and evolve. In which Nimue responds, saying, let me show you how much I've evolved, by saving his life. In which Nimue releases this power, excuse me, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it essentially turns her soul force into and weaponizes it into where she turns her life force kind of into this black, in which Pernita obviously survives this and kind of latches himself onto Yashiro, ends up killing her. Again, I'm not just gonna go very in depth into this fight, because I intend on making it an entire video in itself, so I'll do that another time. But he essentially ends up eating Nimue, in which Mayuri in this moment feels like he failed, and his creation has essentially died. But as Pernita is eating Nimue, Mayuri takes the brain away before Pernita can eat it, and then Pernita randomly just starts imploding, and obviously Pernita heals itself, so it's healing itself, but it's also exploding and healing itself and exploding. Excuse me, sorry. He starts exploding more than he could regenerate, essentially, and Mayuri then reveals the reason for this is Nimue's cells are constantly kind of repairing each other. The way Nimue works is she needs her brain to constantly keep her cells repairing each other over and over again, as her cells are kind of clashing with each other on a constant basis, which is why none of the previous Nimues ever worked. And so without the brain, these cells just kind of implode themselves, right? And so since Pernita is now eating the body but not the brain is not there to control Nimue's body, so Nimue's body is essentially imploding inside of Nimue and basically destroying it, which I think is a very interesting way to end this fight, but a very Mayuri way to end the fight as well. Like I said, I never expected to love this fight as much as I did, but this fight blew my expectations out of the water. It was absolutely amazing. Again, I'll go more in depth into the actual fight itself in another video that the fight will probably have by itself, but I absolutely love this fight. Right now is my number one. Like I said, my number one and number two could be interchangeable any day of the week, but for right now, that is my number one for today. As I'm making this video, that is my number one, and that is my personal top 5 favorite Bleach 1000 Year Blood War fights. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to hit that thumbs up button. Let me know if y'all want to see more videos like this too. I know this is kind of the first video I'm doing like this on the channel, but I really kind of like this format, and again, I just love Bleach and I love talking about it, so I would love to do a lot more of this content on the channel. So y'all let me know in the comment section down below, what would y'all have put in your top 5, what would y'all have taken out, what would be different for you personally, and if you enjoyed it and if you would like to see more. And without further ado, it's your boy Arrahaffv, son of Arrahaffv, and it's me, y'all. Peace and out.